Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started.
Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the Herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course. And I always feel like I talk about the course too much in this like promotion time, but then people are like, oh my God, you launched a course. Like, oh shit, I missed the enrollment. And then, yeah, people are just like, you need to talk about it regularly all the time. So I'm just trying much better with this like whole marketing shebang to promote the course, because obviously, you know, the family need the funds and things, and the Solidarity Apothecary depends on this course for, you know, all of the other work that I do in terms of supporting people experiencing state violence. But I also just desperately and deeply want it to serve people, because it has, and I'm going to be reading some of the testimonials later on in this episode, and I just want to, I just feel passionate that so many people are experiencing distress and experiencing symptoms of kind of trauma and how their body's expressing trauma and distress. And like, obviously this is kind of part of a very like human need to survive and adapt, but also some of these things are unnecessary, right? Like we can work through them. We can have support from plants to feel differently. And I was definitely just smashed with trauma for like a good decade through my 20s, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And I think, it's part of my work in the world to try, to support people to access different states of feeling and being so that they can, live the lives they want to live, whether that's engaging in struggles for liberation or just, having a kind of pleasurable, meaningful life. So anyway, I'm not going to apologize about marketing it, because I know that it can really, really help folks. And I think it's a super unique offering. And, it is no one turned away for lack of funds. So when you're listening to this, I hope you know that it is literally accessible to everyone. So if you're in a place where you don't have the finances right now to enroll, like that's not a barrier. I'll talk a bit more about that as we go on. But I just want to introduce the course, the different modules. I'll talk about myself and my sort of scope of practice and putting it together. I'll talk about who it's for. And how it's structured, how you can access it, how the kind of enrollment works, everything you need to know about the Herbalism and PTSD and traumatic stress course I will cover. But if I don't cover it all and you still have a question, please feel free to email me, info@solidarityapothecary.org, or feel free to like DM me on Instagram. You might get a faster response on there. Okay, so what is the course? So it is an opportunity to develop an in-depth knowledge of plant medicine, trauma, and nervous system physiology grounded in an anti-oppressive analysis. So it's an in-depth program consisting of 8 modules that explore how herbalism can support us through distress and aid in like trauma recovery. And I talk about how trauma is like not in the past, like it's not necessarily something we've gone through historically that we're still coping with. It's like actually we're, people are going through things right now. Like you might be leaving an abusive partner right now, or, surviving a genocide right now, for example. So it's kind of not just in the past, if that makes sense. Okay, in terms of like practical things, it is open for enrollment on Saturday, the 22nd of March. And the last day to enroll is Sunday, the 13th of April. So it's only open for those few weeks. And the reason I do that is because marketing it is a lot of work to kind of like consistently promote the course. It's also a lot of work to kind of do the admin and onboard people. And, people have like payment issues, stuff like this. And also like, it's just kind of a way for me and my life and the things going on. Like historically, I used to, well, not historically, but literally before I got pregnant, I used to be going to northern France every month, working in a mobile clinic for refugees. So having this kind of big course launch was something that I needed to do like focus time on. And at the moment, I'm looking after my 10-month-old beautiful son called Lee. So I'm not able to work full time. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, it's just open for this time period. So I really want to emphasize that. Like I'm very strict on not letting people in afterwards. Like I take all the enrollment infrastructure offline just to kind of like have that boundary. So please, if you're interested, join in this time. It's not going to be open again until this autumn. And I don't know when. That could be September, but that could be November. Do you know what I mean? It sort of depends on the baby and some other offerings I'm working on and stuff. So yeah. So sliding scale pricing, I will talk about that more in depth soon. 0 time stress, right? So it's a course, you sign up, you get instant access, and then all the materials are online ready for you to work through, and you can work through them now. You can work through them in 2 months' time. You can work through them in 2 years' time. As long as the Solidarity Apothecary exists, it will be kind of there for you. And, including any like future updates on the course. I wanted to create something for people who have overwhelmed and stressed nervous systems, which is, to be honest, the majority of people living in capitalism, but that's a side note. But I wanted to create something that didn't create this like huge container of time pressure. So I want people to be able to just like dip in and out. So maybe you watch a few videos and then life gets busy and then you come back to it. Or maybe you encounter an amazing herb somewhere and you think, oh, I'd really like to know more about that. So then you go to that specific lesson on that specific plant. For example, other people like to work through it, in a very like structured kind of linear way. And yeah, whatever your learning style, that's kind of supported. So yeah, it includes video lessons. So it's mostly me like talking, like the audio with slides. So I'm like a super visual person, visual learner. So the slides are, it's not just like death by bullet points, but there are a lot of bullet points and quotes and memes and pictures. I've tried to put things into frameworks and diagrams and things. And then, you're able to download all those slides. So if you like printing them off so that you can kind of illustrate them or draw on them, then you're welcome to do that. There's also transcripts for every episode, and there's also downloadable audio files so you can listen kind of on the go. One of my things like in the near future that I'd like to do is to put all the audio files like in a private podcast feed so that it was like much more accessible for people to to kind of work through. And then there's also resource lists for deeper learning. So if I've talked about a plan and I've quoted some sort of clinical study on that herb, like I will include like the original research paper. I've also got kind of, it's unfortunately, I know Google are really evil, but it's kind of like, just this horrible thing about accessibility, but it's like a whole drive basically of resources where there's like tons of handouts, and further reading, things that are kind of open source and available. There's also lists of, reading lists and podcasts and videos and things. So what I've tried to do is introduce various topics in the course, and then you can kind of like build on that for your own deeper learning. And also, to kind of like make it a bit more diverse in terms of like whose voices are you hearing, like whose bodies of work are you engaging with or, interfacing with. And I'm obviously like a white herbalist who lives in England. I have a very working class background, but it's definitely like one voice amongst like thousands of different people. So I wanted to kind of amplify different people of color and their research and links to their projects and their books who've already got, huge bodies of work on this topic or like these topics. So so there's this whole resource drive for you. So there's no like group calls, like, when I was designing the course, I did a lot of kind of like talking to people one-to-one about, what they were thinking and emailing people thinking, would you be interested in this offering? And like, it was very clear that around like such a sensitive topic like trauma, people hate doing these online courses where they're like forced into Zoom rooms with people they don't know, where people are like disclosing like really heavy shit, or they feel pressure to disclose what's going on for them, and often their kind of life experiences are like very deeply sensitive, and I just didn't want that. So so there's no kind of like group calls, like you don't have to interact with anyone. Like I don't have the capacity to like facilitate that kind of space, and I think facilitating that kind of space is such a huge skill. So not that I don't have those skills, but just that like curating an online space to talk about trauma, it is like its own thing, right? Like, so there's none of that. And there's also no exhausting information overwhelm. Like when I was talking to people designing the course, it was clear like people just like, they're just broken with like forums, messages, emails, newsletters, so there's none of that. Like you'll get a welcome email. You'll get an email every 2 months, just like reminding you that it exists and how to log in. And then you'll get an email when you complete the course. And other than that, like I'm trying to just like be as hands off as possible so that you can study when you have like the headspace, the energy and the desire. Okay, so what's inside the course? So I'm going to talk through the different modules. So module 1 is all about like what is trauma. So yeah, we look at kind of the reductionist ways trauma is like commonly framed, that it's a result of brain chemistry, that we are sick, insane, or mad, like air quotes. And we explore trauma as part of the world around us that shapes us, from racism to ecological destruction. And we dive into common trauma dynamics such as lack of safety and support, powerlessness, and dysregulation. In this module, we also confront the kind of phrase PTSD, and we look at this framework of like disorder and some of the kind of oppressive dynamics around psychiatry and things. It's like very briefly touched on. We also look at the kind of history of like the PTSD diagnosis and people that have like lobbied for it, like survivors of sexual violence and veterans from various kind of military operations and things. And yeah, I mean, it's like so hard to not just like want to go there with that politically right now. But yeah, we're kind of looking at what is trauma, like how is trauma commonly framed, and what are some like more liberating ways we can kind of frame trauma? Like, how do we frame trauma in a kind of anti-capitalist or anti-colonial framework, and then finally, I think kind of probably the hardest lesson for most people is this common trauma dynamics, where we look at like what makes particular life experiences like traumatizing, whether that's threat to life or, captivity, things like this. And so, yeah, we kind of dive into some of the kind of common trauma dynamics. Okay, and then module 2, we bring in the plants. So here, this is the kind of like setting the scene. It's like the herbal foundations module. So we look at important kind of herbal safety information, ways to work with plants, medicine making, foraging, journaling, and more, and the many incredible medicinal actions of plants. We introduce a framework for looking at constitutions, tissue states, and energetics, and we also look at the role of plants in the essential foundations for health: sleep, movement, digestion, and nutrition. So this is kind of like a really fantastic introduction to herbalism. And even if you're already on your herbal journey, which a lot of people who enroll are, everyone has gotten something from this lesson, like from this series of lessons. So it's really encouraging you to think about like how you're gonna like kind of begin your herbal journey, if that makes sense, while talking about important things like safety, understanding the lingo in terms of herbal actions, and introducing these kind of like frameworks of energetics, like what do we mean when we say herbs are cooling or heating, for example, or drying or moistening. And then the essential foundations for health is really kind of like drawing on my work as a herbalist in terms of like when I support someone one-to-one, like I have a framework of really focusing on their sleep, for example, and then their nervous system health, and then their digestion and nutrition, and then addressing like chronic inflammation. And we kind of, we talk about those things of, what are common nutritional deficiencies that can contribute, for example, to anxiety or depression, or, expressions of distress in different ways. And then module 3 is about how trauma shapes the body. So I've written here on the course page, there are 8 billion people on this planet and 8 billion ways in which people experience and process trauma. Our bodies express distress in multiple ways, which are different for all of us. But this module explores common trauma symptoms and the ways that trauma can impact our bodies, from triggers and flashbacks to autoimmune conditions and chronic inflammation. In this kind of module, we're kind of getting an understanding of like how can these like distressing, difficult life experiences, like how do they sort of impact our kind of physiology. And I've got a framework around how the body expresses distress. So we're looking at things like hyperarousal, like rage and anxiety and irritability and anxiety. We're looking at kind of changes in worldview, like not trusting people, not trusting the world, hypervigilance, things like this. We might be looking at sleep disturbances as like a very common pattern of PTSD and trauma. We might be looking at memories triggers, for example. So looking at how trauma literally affects like brain physiology, how we integrate traumatic memories, how we process them. It's kind of just like, again, super comprehensive. Like lots of people find it really interesting. And then there's a lesson around trauma, chronic illness and inflammation. So how these kind of like processes of activation in the body can lead to chronic illness, whether that's hypertension, like high blood pressure, or type 2 diabetes, for example, from, the body being in this kind of sympathetic fight or flight state consistently. Okay, and so then module 4 is called How We Can Shape It Back. So in this module, we take a deep look into the understanding of nervous system physiology. We look at different frameworks for describing states of being, such as polyvagal theory, which is a framework for understanding how the autonomic nervous system has evolved to keep us safe and alive. We introduce the roles of plant medicine in shifting how we feel and explore some of the goals we can aspire to in healing and feeling differently. So in this module, there is like the focus is this like nervous system deep dive. So I'm trying not to be like too geeky, but I think it also satisfies people that are geeky, like are, like kind of a bit more like biomedical. So understanding the sort of different branches of the nervous system and, like networks of nerves and the tissues they innervate and stuff. And, like what are these kind of different states? What do they look like in terms of parasympathetic, this like rest and digest state versus fight or flight? And then looking at this like layer of polyvagal theory of kind of different nervous system states that you've probably come across in popular culture, like fight and flight and freeze. But we also look at mixed states like shutdown and play and stillness. And it's a really, really helpful theory for people trying to understand how they are feeling, and also that then indicating what they might need, and, how we can move to a state of what polyvagal theory calls safe and social. Like, how are we feeling able to kind of connect with others? So there's like a comprehensive deep dive into that stuff. And then there's just a small lesson about healing goals and talking about kind of, like there's lots of like shit on the internet about, just like the whole world is traumatic. You just have to get on with it. Like everyone's traumatized in capitalism, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like really, really, really deeply frustrates me because like it is possible to still find the world distressing and engage with the horrors of the world and not shut down. And shutting down is a survival mechanism. Like it is possible to engage with those horrors and still be like operating from a place of safe and social, and you're focused and you can do the work, and you can like move in and out of states. You can, soothe yourself when you're triggered. For example, you can, what you need in a certain moment, and that, experiencing certain kind of expressions of distress is just like it doesn't have to be that way, if that makes sense. It's like setting kind of goals for yourself of like, how do you want to feel? Okay. And then module 5 is like collective responses to traumatic stress. So here we introduce a framework exploring radical responses to traumatic stress. We look at the many individual and collective practices that can aid trauma recovery. Plant medicines are like one tool in the toolbox. And in this module, we look at their role in each of these necessary stages to help explore the diverse role of plant medicines in trauma recovery. I kind of like developed this framework, and I talk in the course about like what the different, like the whole ton of influences that have like, fed into the design of this framework. But it's kind of based around like release. So how do we kind of like release trauma from the body? How do we like release kind of like activation and energy and distress, and then rest and renew? So after any kind of like traumatic experience or period of ongoing stress, like we generally need like a period of rest. And when we don't have that, that's when, we're heading into territory of like deep burnout and chronic illness, for example. And then reconnect is all about this like safe and social state. Like how do we, like work through trauma to be able to like have healthy relationships with people, for example. And this is where we talk about relationships with plants, because it's not just humans, right? Like the non-human world can bring so much to us. And then there's finally resistance. Like there's no point going through this trauma and, doing all this healing work if that trauma is just continuing to harm people, right? So it's like, how do we get to the kind of root causes of these like sources of trauma? And I included this module because plant medicines like are not enough. Like they are like a fantastic, amazing, incredible, life-changing tool, but we need like much bigger like social change, and we need like collective care and mutual aid and support. So that's kind of what this module is about. And you can see in each of the lessons like where plant medicines are like part of that. Okay, and then module 6, we start to get deep with the plants. This is when we begin our series of lessons taking a deep dive into nervines. So these are plant medicines with an affinity with the nervous system. So we introduce herbs which enable our body to feel calmer and grounded, prepare us for sleep, and allow us to move into a more parasympathetic or rest and digest state. We also look at nervine tonics, so herbs which act to tonify, strengthen, and restore the proper structure and function of the nervous system. They are a key tool in enduring and recovering from traumatic stress. So there's a kind of introductory lesson all about working with nervines, like where do you start, how do you choose that herb, what factors do you need to consider, all of those things, safety things, stuff like that. And then we have this like deep dive into relaxant nervines, and then a deep dive into nerve tonics. So each plant profile, there's 32 plants that are like profiled in detail. So they're all kind of like filmed separately. And again, I'm sort of talking through slides, but you can, download them. So we look at the kind of plant chemistry, we look at the medicinal actions, we look at how to work with the plant as a nervine, sort of like recommended ways to work with the plant. And like, there's like a lot of nuance there from a lot of experience that I've got working with these herbs. And then I kind of introduced some of the research that's available around them. They're all quite like comprehensive. They're definitely a work in progress. Like, I would really like to update them sometime, like new information's coming out all the time about plants. They're really, really comprehensive introduction to these amazing plants. And then module 7 is like basically a part 2 of this. So this is when we explore our kind of hypnotic or sedative nervines. So these are herbs that can help us kind of induce a stronger relaxant effect and like a deep and healing state of sleep. We also take a deep dive into cardiac nervines. So these are herbs that have an affinity with the heart and the cardiovascular system. And then we also explore stimulating nervines. So these are herbs that can have a sort of direct stimulatory effect on the nervous system, which are kind of appropriate in certain contexts. And again, 32 plants altogether of these nervines deep dives. So you'll get to know several of them and hopefully begin working with them in your life. And then module 8 is all about practically working with plant medicines. So this module introduces many of the incredible ways we can make medicine with plants and includes how-to guides for making tinctures, glycerites, and infused oils, amongst other things. You will learn how to harvest herbs and make potent medicine for yourself safely, effectively, and sustainably. This module also explores case studies of the ways that plant medicines have supported people with PTSD and traumatic stress in their lives, giving us a clearer idea of effective ways to support ourselves with plant medicines over time. You will make an implementation plan for yourself and identify clear next steps to put the program into practice. So this module, there's a really fun lesson all about kind of like sustainable foraging and ethical foraging and wildcrafting. The working with plant medicine in practice, is just like so much there about making medicines, and a lot of herbalists, like all herbalist training will or should include medicine making. But, I have been a medicine maker for a really long time at a massive scale. We distributed 17,000 medicines during the invasion of Ukraine. Like I've made like thousands of medicines for distribution with our clinic in northern France, and just made loads of medicines for my family and the clients and my herbal care packages for people experiencing state violence and stuff. Like I am a very like zero fluff teacher. Like you will not find extra information that's just there to like soothe the teacher's ego, like it's all super practical tips of like what you need. Here's the folk method of how to make this tincture, shove these herbs in a jar and cover it with vodka. Here's the standardized way to do it. Here's how you weigh and measure them and blah, blah, blah. So you'll kind of have a pick and mix. This is all about kind of putting the course into practice. So that's it. That's the different modules. I just wanted to kind of keep going really of why the course matters. So yeah, there was one testimony that I've put on the course page from someone called Ash that says, "This course was incredible. I learned so much about myself and my brain, despite having PTSD my entire life and being in therapy on and off for decades, as well as I did herbalism and supporting all the folks like me. Nicole has written a love letter to the suffering and covered it in rose petals. I cannot recommend it enough." So yeah, you might be wondering if the course is for you. And I kind of have identified like two groups of people that will really, really benefit from the course. So it's folks who are like experiencing PTSD or traumatic stress, so you're seeking relief from that. And then it's also folks who want to show up for others experiencing trauma. And as we know, a lot of people fit into both of those categories. A lot of people are engaged in amazing sort of solidarity and care work because of what they've been through. But yeah, in terms of people that are kind of experiencing trauma, or maybe they don't use that language, maybe you don't have that language to describe your own experiences, but it might be for you, for example, if you're feeling stuck in like survival mode, experiencing a lot of anxiety or hypervigilance, or even emotional shutdown or exhaustion. You could be experiencing things like panic attacks or nightmares, flashbacks, insomnia, anger, maybe digestive issues and headaches, a feeling of brain fog, or, just kind of frequent infections and like immune system challenges, or maybe muscle pain. Like I said, like every body is different in expressing distress, but either way, like you are, you're kind of desperate to feel different. Triggers might feel constant, and finding a sense of peace or control could feel impossible for you. You might be really frustrated with PTSD resources, like maybe they're super expensive and inaccessible, or they've just been ineffective for you, or they're just trying to treat something that's in the past and not with the reality of what you're dealing with right now. Maybe you feel disconnected from your body, from support systems, and from the land. People talk about collective care, but right now, maybe that feels like a fantasy because you feel so isolated. You may be curious about herbal medicine, but feel overwhelmed by kind of wellness culture that ignores class, poverty, trauma, and oppression, for example. You might be struggling with chronic illness and knowing that trauma plays a role somewhere, but not sure where to begin with that. Maybe you've experienced a recent bereavement, or you're kind of haunted by grief and loss. And yeah, maybe you just want to learn about trauma, but you just can't face another group where people don't understand how you're feeling. And yeah, maybe you just need something that's self-paced, where you can explore trauma on your own terms, in your own body, without external opinions or judgment. So yeah, if that's you and you're feeling those things, then yeah, I just want to say, I'm sorry, I've been there. I'm still there sometimes, with certain situations and things, but yeah, there are routes out, like you can feel differently. And there are tools and collectives and communities that are possible to offer support. But yeah, the course kind of, introduces them. So yeah, it might also be that you just want to show up for others experiencing trauma. Like you can see that the world isn't becoming any less traumatizing. Like, damn, we can see that. Obviously, I'm in England, but I have got my eyes on what's happening in the so-called US and this, real apparent rise of fascism and stuff. You do your best to organize support in the face of massive threats, from rising fascism to ecosystem collapse, but it's exhausting. I know a lot of people who kind of like follow the Apothecary online or support my work, like are engaged in different struggles for liberation. And yeah, I know folks that are like, they want to have that kind of understanding and knowledge of trauma so that they can be, great kind of community organizers, basically. So you want to feel resourced and prepared because understanding trauma is essential for navigating the years ahead. You care deeply about liberation, but collective organizing has left you drained. Your friends, comrades, and loved ones are wrecked with anxiety, chronic stress, poor sleep, and burnout that are everywhere, yet you feel powerless to help. And you want to understand how trauma actually affects people and how to help them find a way out of the PTSD maze. Maybe you just think herbalism is cool as fuck, but you couldn't tell a dandelion from a daisy. I hope you think herbalism is cool. I'm trying really hard to get people to think herbalism is cool. But yeah, maybe you just need like structured support to build the kind of plant knowledge you've always craved. Or, you could be a practicing herbalist and you might be like deeply knowledgeable about plants, but you were never taught about trauma in your clinical training, for example, even though it affects so many people that you support and you want to show up for them in a deeper way. Or, you just want that kind of more in-depth study of nervines or just to hear someone else's perspective on them. Or you could be a trauma practitioner. You've got it down, you're fluent in the language of it, but you're just really interested in the herbalism aspect and how that can play a role. Or maybe if you're none of these things or you're all of these things, you might just feel that the plants are calling you. Because I hope they are, because that's what happens. Like we feel drawn to a herb often and then feel inspired to learn about them. And then, there's often that shift of, needing that medicine in your life and being transformed by that plant. And anyway, which actually leads to the next section about transform your life with plant medicines. This is some of the benefits of the course. So, what are you gonna kind of be able to take away from this, right? So you will be able to develop a personal plant medicine practice. So you'll learn to create your own herbal remedies for nervous system support, from tinctures and teas to oils and glycerites. You will master the practical skills to build a personalized herbal medicine cabinet that can support you through a lifetime of experiences. I just want to emphasize this lifetime thing because like plant medicine can accompany us for our whole lives, like I'm nearly 20 years into this and I'm still learning about herbs like every single day of the week. I'm still taking medicine every single day of the week and connecting with plants outside. And, it is a tool that can be there for you, like for your whole life. And you don't know what's going to kind of happen in the future, if that makes sense. But having these skills and this resilience is like, you're really kind of a lot stronger. So you'll gain confidence in safely harvesting, preparing, and working with plants that can help your nervous system. You'll be able to understand trauma through a liberation lens. So you can move beyond reductionist views of trauma as merely faulty brain chemistry and explore how systemic oppression shapes our bodies and nervous systems while learning empowering frameworks that honor your experiences. You'll gain a deep understanding of how trauma manifests physically, from sleep disruption to chronic inflammation, and how plants can support healing on multiple levels. So, like most other trauma trainings that you'll do are often like very kind of politically neutral. And that is so frustrating for people experiencing oppression, whether that's you're a racialized person or a queer person or a disabled person, like, how systemic this violence is and this oppression is and how that is affecting you. But, you're very lucky if you can find practitioners that are using that language, and obviously there are, like I've said, I've got this whole resource library of folks that are doing this work in this field, but I'm just saying like very mainstream trauma resources on books like will not talk about this. You'll learn the language of the nervous system. So you'll develop an in-depth knowledge of nervous system physiology and nervous system states that can help make sense of how you are feeling and enable you to choose the plant medicines your body would be strengthened by. Being able to understand, describe, and communicate to others how we are feeling can be truly revolutionary. I don't know if any of you are in a relationship, but with me and my partner, it's like, he has been through a lot. Like, he's very working class. He is a heroin user in recovery. He's been through fucking shitloads with his, addiction and trauma and prison and all the things. And I've had, my own life experiences. And so, it can be a little bit disastrous in terms of us both being in sort of triggered trauma states. But, like having that language of like, hey, babe, I'm feeling like quite activated right now. I just need 10 minutes. Or, he knows, like, bless him, like he'll know when I'm like very overwhelmed and triggered, and I'll just come back and he's just like made me like handmade like potato chips in the air fryer. And I'm like, oh, babe, like, my love language. But just like having those, like that language and those tools to understand your body, to understand your state, to understand what's going on, to know what you need, like that's just like half the battle, right? Like you're just like, I literally spent my 20s just bouncing about. Like, there's like pinball machines where you're just like fleeing from one thing to another. It's like, that's what I feel like you're like in trauma. Like, you don't understand how you're feeling, you know, you're overreacting to everything, blaming everyone else, you know, just like in wild states of like hyperactivation, fight or flight, distress. And yeah, like not having the language to describe how you're feeling is like so hard. So that's why this stuff is like so life-changing. Okay, skillfully navigate nervines, so you can gain an in-depth knowledge of nervine herbs and learn which herbs can help with different manifestations of traumatic stress. So you'll learn how to match specific plants to your unique constitutions and needs. So like, for example, I'm a very like hot, warm person. Like I rarely wear a jumper, I rarely wear socks. Everyone laughs at me because I'm always warm. So it's like, for me, learning about energetics and herbalism was so life-changing, because it was like, I need like cooling relaxants, you know, like lemon balm and rose and hawthorn, because I have such a warm constitution that if I take like warm stimulating plants like garlic, for example, like I'm in trouble. So yeah, just kind of understanding like plants that match your kind of body and your needs is really important. And likewise, when you have this kind of like accessible mini apothecary to yourself, it's like, okay, I can't sleep right now because, you know, I'm going over the death of my best friend like over and over again. So, okay, maybe I need some passion flower tincture for those racing thoughts to help me get to sleep. Or, you know, I have like really intense muscle tension because I'm like super worried about money. So like maybe I need like lavender right now. Or I'm about to kind of enter a community event and I'm feeling like super anxious. I'm going to have some lemon balm because it's going to like be a gentle parasympathetic kind of shifter, but it's not going to make me too like sedated, for example. So yeah, you'll have this kind of like knowledge to like navigate these different plants, you know, and navigate which ones will help you in different states. Okay, build life-changing relationships with plants. So discover how the more than human world can offer connection and stability when you've had your trust in humans shattered. Learn to develop long-term reciprocal relationships with plants that go beyond just taking remedies. Through foraging, growing, and medicine-making practices, you'll create meaningful connections that support you through life's challenges. With plants, you are never alone. And you'll learn in the course that part of kind of common trauma dynamics is obviously like increasing this distrust of other people, you know, and the exhaustion of like hypervigilance and like scanning people for safety, and, you know, like ultimately feeling like the world is like now incredibly unsafe, or maybe it has always been unsafe. You know, I talk about those nuances too, but like herbs are so wonderful because they're not humans, so they don't trigger the same responses in us. They can trigger feelings of safety and trust and help us move into this like safe and social state. And yeah, they can give us like meaning and relationship and connection in ways that, you know, you've potentially missed if you've had a childhood of like neglect and abuse, for example. So yeah, I think that's like what is really life-changing about herbalism isn't just the thing you're taking or ingesting, it is really that relationship with the plants. Okay, and finally, develop herbal resilience for collective liberation. So in a world full of injustice and oppression that can be deeply traumatizing, we need plant medicines more than ever. Connect with plant medicine traditions that have supported human healing for generations. Learn how these time-tested practices can help us navigate contemporary struggles, from climate change to state violence. You'll discover how plants can help us build resilience while working toward collective liberation. And yeah, if you don't know me, if you haven't been following my work, then you'll, you know, like that's my jam, right? Like that's my work. It's like all about collective liberation and, you know, kind of politicizing herbalism and, you know, working with plant traditions that humans have, you know, had for millennia, but like how do we work with them for the times that we're in now, you know, where our nervous systems are under like vast amounts of pressure and, you know, there's huge kind of escalating things going on like climate change and state violence. And yeah, how can we kind of build like herbal resilience for collective liberation? All right. Okay. So some more practical things. I think I might have to do these in some separate episodes because this is nearly 40 minutes. So I'm going to stop now and then I'm going to do a part 2, and I'm going to continue working through the course page and sharing all about the course with you. So if you've got this far, thank you so much for listening. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about the sliding scale, how much it costs, how to access this course, what the course is and isn't, and some of the commonly asked questions and stuff, and some of the testimonials. Okay, thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.